The night she looked at me with those tired eyes and asked, "Can we stay here tonight?" My heart practically stopped. Not because I didn't want her there, but because the truth was painfully simple. I lived in a tiny apartment with exactly one bed. No couch, no guest room. Just one bed and 1,000 questions running through my head. I remember standing there in the doorway, keys still in my hand, and blurting out the only honest thing I could think of. I only have one bed. She didn't say anything right away. She just stared at me like she was deciding whether to laugh, cry, or walk away. And that's the moment I realized the entire night, maybe even our friendship, was about to change. So let me ask you something before I go any further. If you were in my position and someone you cared about asked to stay the night knowing you only had one bed, what would you have done? To understand why that moment mattered so much, you need to know how everything started. My name is Daniel, and about 3 years ago, my life was painfully ordinary. I worked a quiet office job doing graphic design for a small marketing firm. My days were predictable. Wake up, coffee, commute, work, microwave dinner, sleep. I wasn't unhappy exactly, but I wasn't really living either. I had a small apartment on the 3rd floor of an old brick building that always smelled faintly like laundry detergent and someone's burnt toast. It wasn't much, just a kitchenette, a small bathroom, a desk, and a bed pushed against the wall, but it was mine. And most nights, it was very, very quiet. Then one rainy Tuesday afternoon, she walked into my life. Her name was Emma. She had just transferred into our department after moving from another city, and the first thing I noticed about her was her laugh. It wasn't loud, but it was warm, the kind of laugh that made other people smile even if they didn't hear the joke. She had messy brown hair she constantly tried to tuck behind her ear and a habit of asking questions about everything. Within a week, she'd learned everyone's coffee orders and somehow convinced half the office to join her for lunch breaks outside instead of eating at their desks. I was the quiet one in the corner, the guy who kept his headphones on most of the time. But Emma didn't seem to notice that barrier everyone else respected. The second day she worked there, she walked straight up to my desk and said, "You're Daniel, right? The one who designed the travel campaign last month?" I nodded awkwardly. She smiled like she'd just confirmed a theory. "That design was amazing," she said. "You make quiet things look exciting." It was such a strange compliment that I didn't even know how to respond. But from that moment on, we started talking. At first it was small things, projects, deadlines, stupid office gossip. But over time our conversations stretched longer. Lunch breaks turned into walks around the block. Walks turned into coffee after work. And coffee sometimes turned into long conversations about everything from childhood memories to the weird fears we didn't admit to anyone else. Emma had this way of pulling stories out of people. With her, silence never felt awkward. It felt like space waiting to be filled with something honest. A few months later, I learned something important about her life. She had moved to the city after ending a long relationship. 5 years with someone who, according to her, slowly stopped seeing her. Not in a dramatic, explosive way, but in that quiet way where conversations disappear and affection fades until you feel like a stranger in your own home. When she told me that story, we were sitting in a late-night diner sharing fries. She shrugged it off with a smile, but I could see something heavy behind her eyes. I didn't realize it then, but somewhere along the way, my feelings for her had started changing. She was still my friend, of course, my best friend, honestly, but there were moments when she laughed and leaned her head back, or when she absent-mindedly nudged my shoulder during a joke, and something in my chest would tighten in a way I couldn't ignore. Still, I never said anything. I didn't want to ruin what we had. About a year into our friendship, things started getting complicated. Emma's life outside work wasn't as stable as she made it seem. Her roommate suddenly moved out after getting a job overseas, leaving her struggling to cover rent. She brushed it off like it was temporary, but I could tell it stressed her out. She picked up freelance work, stayed late at the office, and kept telling everyone she had it under control. Then came the night everything changed. It was late autumn, and the rain was coming down so hard the streets looked like mirrors. I had just finished working on a project when my phone buzzed. It was Emma. "Are you still at the office?" she asked. Her voice sounded different. Tired. Fragile. I told her yes. She showed up 20 minutes later, soaked from the rain and carrying a small duffel bag. That's when she told me her landlord had sold the building and the tenants had to leave sooner than expected. Her plan had fallen apart. The temporary place she thought she'd secured backed out at the last minute. "I just need somewhere for tonight," she said quietly. Without thinking, I said, "Come to my place." The words came out so naturally that I didn't process them until we were already walking through the rain toward my car. During the drive, she stared out the window, watching the streetlights blur across the glass. I could tell she was embarrassed to even ask for help. Emma was the type of person who helped everyone else, but rarely asked for anything herself. When we finally reached my apartment building and climbed the stairs to the 3rd floor, reality hit me. My apartment was small, very small, and when I opened the door and flicked on the light, there it was, the one bed. Emma stepped inside slowly, looking around the room. Her duffel bag slid off her shoulder and landed softly on the floor. Then she turned to me and asked the question that started this entire story. "Can we stay here tonight?" And that's when I replied, awkwardly scratching the back of my neck, "I only have one bed." For a moment, neither of us said anything. The rain tapped against the window, and the old refrigerator hummed in the corner. Then she laughed, not a nervous laugh, a real one. "Daniel," she said, "I'm not asking for luxury. I just need a roof." Relief washed over me so quickly I almost laughed too. I grabbed a spare blanket from the closet and told her she could take the bed while I slept on the floor. But Emma shook her head. "That's ridiculous," she said. "We'll share. It's just sleep." Now here's where things get interesting, because sharing a bed with someone you secretly care about, while pretending everything is normal, is a lot harder than it sounds. That night we lay there awkwardly at opposite edges of the mattress like two people trying not to fall off a raft. At first we just talked quietly about random things, work, movies, memories from college. The conversation drifted and slowed until the room filled with comfortable silence. At some point she whispered, "Thanks for letting me stay." I told her she didn't have to thank me. Then she said something I didn't expect. "You're a good person, Daniel." Those words stuck with me, because for the first time I realized she trusted me completely. But here's the thing. Feelings don't always respect boundaries. And lying there in the dark next to someone who means that much to you makes every thought louder. So that's the situation I was in. My best friend, the person I cared about more than anyone, sleeping just inches away from me in my tiny apartment with one bed and a million unspoken feelings hanging in the air. And I had a choice to make about what kind of person I wanted to be. Before I tell you what happened next, I want you to pause for a second and really think about it. If you were in my shoes, if the person you secretly loved was right there beside you, vulnerable, trusting you completely, what would you have done? Because that night could have gone a lot of different ways. But what actually happened was something I'll never forget. At some point in the middle of the night, Emma shifted closer, not intentionally, just the unconscious movement of someone trying to get comfortable. Her head rested lightly against my shoulder. I froze, not because it felt wrong, but because it felt incredibly right. For a few seconds I just lay there listening to her breathing, slow, peaceful, safe, and in that moment I realized something important. Love isn't about taking opportunities. It's about protecting people when they trust you. So I didn't move. I didn't say anything. I just stayed there, letting her sleep. The next morning sunlight slipped through the blinds, and Emma woke up before I did. When I opened my eyes, she was already sitting on the edge of the bed watching me with a strange expression. "Did you sleep okay?" I asked. She nodded. Then she said something that completely caught me off guard. "You know, I was kind of scared to ask you for help last night." I asked why. She shrugged slightly and said, "Because people sometimes change when situations get complicated." I sat up slowly. "And did I?" I asked. She looked at me for a long second, then smiled softly. "No," she said. "You didn't." That smile meant more to me than any confession ever could. Over the next few weeks, Emma stayed in my apartment while she sorted out her living situation. We turned the tiny space into something surprisingly comfortable, cooking together in the cramped kitchen, watching movies on my laptop, laughing about how ridiculous it was that two adults were sharing a space barely bigger than a dorm room. And somewhere during those weeks, something shifted between us. Not suddenly, not dramatically, just slowly. Until one evening, while we were washing dishes side by side, Emma said quietly, "You know, that night I asked to stay, I was testing something." I looked at her, confused. "What do you mean?" She dried her hands on a towel and leaned against the counter. "I wanted to see if someone like you really existed," she said. "Someone who could care about a person without expecting anything in return." My heart started pounding. "And?" I asked. She stepped closer. "And you passed." Then she kissed me. Not rushed, not dramatic, just warm and certain. And in that moment, I realized something incredible. Sometimes the most important nights in your life start with something as simple as one question and one honest answer. Emma eventually found her own place again, but by then we weren't just friends anymore. 2 years later, we moved into a bigger apartment together, with 2 beds, even though we only use one. Looking back now, that rainy night could have gone so differently if I'd acted selfishly or let my feelings take control, but choosing respect instead of impulse changed everything. So if there's any lesson in this story, it's this: the strongest relationships aren't built on grand gestures or perfect timing. They're built on trust, on the quiet moments when someone believes you'll do the right thing, and you prove them right. If you made it this far, I'd really love to hear your thoughts. Was I right to handle things the way I did? Or would you have done something differently? Let me know in the comments below. And if you were on my side in this story, make sure to like this video and subscribe for more real-life stories like this one. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you all in the next story.